"You people got your view," Vanessa Croft said, tapping her clipboard against her thigh. The windbreak was a liability. Liabilities get removed. Behind her, two men in orange vests fed the last standing spruce into a chipper. The smell hit me before the sound did. Sap and diesel and fresh sawdust, sweet and sharp. The smell of something that took 123 years to grow, disappearing in about 4 seconds. I didn't say anything, I just wrote down the time. Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. I've been writing down times my whole life. Old habit from 31 years designing snow control structures for the Colorado Department of Transportation. You learn fast that nobody believes you about wind and snow until you show them a stopwatch and a photograph. There were 14 stumps by the time the crew finished that afternoon. 14. One for every premium view lot Vanessa Croft's HOA board had just approved for sale along what used to be my grandfather's windbreak line. Somewhere in a filing cabinet in that same HOA office sat a spreadsheet nobody outside the board had seen, showing roughly $1.3 million in projected proceeds once those lots closed. I didn't know the number yet, I would. What I did know, standing there at the fence line smelling sap and chainsaw exhaust, was simple. My grandfather, Elias Kincaid, planted that windbreak in 1899 for exactly one reason: to stop the wind that came screaming down off the ridge every winter and turned into snowdrifts 12 feet deep on the leeward side. For 123 years, that wall of blue spruce had done its job so quietly that nobody below it ever had to think about wind at all. They were about to think about nothing else. By the time the first blizzard of the season finished with Ridgeline Vista Estates, this quiet little street of 41 homes would need 11 days and a small fortune in bobcat rental just to see daylight again. And by the time the whole thing was over, Vanessa Croft would lose her house, her title, her freedom for a stretch, and $1.7 million she thought was safely laundered through a company with her cousin's name on the paperwork. She wouldn't understand any of it, not really, until the morning she stood in my driveway asking permission to bring heavy equipment onto my land, and I handed her a folder with her own signature in it. A signature she didn't remember giving to a man she didn't know she owed anything to. But that's later. First, you need to understand what she cut down, and why it was never really hers to cut. My name is Walter Kincaid. I'm 67 years old, and until Vanessa Croft's chainsaw crew showed up on my northern property line that Tuesday afternoon, I was just a retired highway engineer trying to keep a 140-acre ranch from falling apart around me. The Kincaid Ranch sits at the base of Sable Ridge, about 6 miles outside a little Colorado town called Piney Fork, at just under 8,000 feet. My grandfather Elias homesteaded the place in 1899, the same year he planted that windbreak, a double row of Colorado blue spruce running 400 yards along the northern boundary, exactly where the land dropped off toward what's now Ridgeline Vista Estates. He didn't do it for a view. He did it because he'd watched a blizzard bury his neighbor's cattle standing up the winter before, and he never wanted to see that again. I still have his ledger, leather cover gone soft and dark with age, pages gone the color of weak coffee, his handwriting cramped and slanted. Planted 340 spruce, North Line, March 1899. God willing they'll hold the snow where it belongs. He didn't know the physics of it, nobody did back then, not formally, but he understood something that took the state of Colorado another 80 years and a graduate degree to put into an equation. A windbreak doesn't stop snow, it manages where the snow falls. Take away the windbreak, and the same snow that used to drop gently on open pasture instead gets picked up by ridge wind and dumped, all at once, in drifts 12, 15, 20 feet deep, right where the wind finally loses momentum. Usually that's a fence line. Sometimes it's a road. In this case, it was about to be a street full of $2.5 million view homes. I spent 31 years with CDOT designing exactly that kind of protection: snow fences, living windbreaks, drift calculations for mountain passes from Wolf Creek to Berthoud. I retired 5 years ago when my knees gave out on me, Came home to run what was left of the ranch my father left me, which by then was mostly just this house, the barn, and about 140 acres that hadn't been subdivided off and sold in the 80s, like most of the rest of Sable Ridge. The house itself is nothing fancy. 2 stories, tin roof gone the colour of a nickel, a kitchen table my grandfather built by hand in 1899 out of the same lumber he used for the barn. You can still see the adze marks if you run your thumb along the underside. Out back, past the garden my late wife Carol used to keep, there's a small family cemetery with 3 generations of Kincaids in it. Elias and his wife Martha, my father Thomas, and my mother Ruth, and now Carol, who passed 4 years ago from a stroke that took her in about 6 minutes on a Sunday morning while she was watering tomatoes. I still smell her rose bushes some mornings when the wind comes down off the ridge just right, mixed in with hay dust and diesel from the tractor I keep meaning to sell. I tell you all that because people who saw me, flannel shirt, 15-year-old truck, boots held together with duct tape, assumed I was just some broke old rancher clinging to land he couldn't afford to keep. Vanessa Croft certainly assumed that. She looked at me the way you look at something you're going to step around on your way somewhere important. Vanessa ran Ridgeline Vista Estates. Well, she ran the Homeowners Association, and depending who you asked, she also ran the development company that had quietly bought up the last unsold parcels along the ridge 2 years earlier through something called Ridgeline Legacy Partners LLC. Officially, Vanessa had nothing to do with Ridgeline Legacy Partners. Officially, her cousin Brent's name was on the filing. Unofficially, everybody in Piney Fork who paid attention to county recorder documents, and I am exactly that kind of person, knew Vanessa Croft had been the one negotiating with the county on both sides of every transaction for 3 years running. She drove a white Range Rover with a vanity plate that said RVEPRES, wore a blazer that cost more than my truck's last transmission job, and carried a clipboard everywhere she went like it was a badge of office. She was 52, sharp-featured, quick to smile at newcomers, and quicker to stop smiling once your check cleared. Her signature move, the thing everyone in the neighborhood mentioned when they talked about her, was showing up in person to deliver bad news so she could watch your face while she did it. The board voted unanimously, she told me that Tuesday afternoon, holding out a laminated notice like she was serving papers. Windbreak removal falls under the Beautification Special Assessment. You'll see the charge reflected on next month's statement. I looked past her at the stumps, 14 of them, raw and pale, weeping sap in the cold. Beyond that, down the slope, 41 rooftops with fresh snow-guard shingles and 3-car garages, none of which, I already knew, standing there, had ever needed to think about wind in their entire existence. "You cut trees on my property line," I said. "Not yours." Vanessa's smile didn't move an inch. "The survey says otherwise, Mr. Kincaid, but I understand this is emotional for you. Old trees, family history, all that." She clicked her pen. "I'll have the invoice sent to your address. 60 days, or it goes to collections." I didn't argue with her. I've spent enough years in front of state auditors and county commissioners to know arguing with somebody holding a clipboard and a bad survey gets you exactly nowhere. I just wrote down the time again, Tuesday, 2:51 p.m., and I started making calls. The invoice came by regular mail, not certified, which told me everything about how confident Vanessa Croft was that nobody would push back. $14,000. Beautification Special Assessment, Windbreak Removal, and View Corridor Enhancement, it read, printed on Ridgeline Vista Estates letterhead with a logo of a pine tree that I found darkly funny given what they'd just done to mine. I photographed the invoice on my kitchen table, the one my grandfather built, morning light coming through the window at an angle that put a long yellow stripe across the paper. Thursday, 9:12 a.m. Then I photographed the envelope, the postmark, the 14 stumps still visible from my porch like a row of pulled teeth. I kept a folder. I've kept folders my whole career. That's what 31 years of state work teaches you. Documentation isn't paranoia, it's insurance. I didn't call Vanessa Croft. I wrote her a letter instead, sent certified, return receipt requested, citing the recorded plat and deed for my property. Kincaid Ranch, Book 412, page 88, filed 1899. Showing the windbreak sat entirely inside my northern boundary, 40 feet south of the HOA's own platted line. I attached the survey my grandfather had paid for out of his own pocket back when Piney Fork Ranch's title still did work by hand. The original linen map, yellowed but legible. Corner stakes still standing exactly where his measurements put them a century later. Here's what most homeowners don't know. An HOA cannot enforce an assessment against property that was never legally brought under its covenants in the first place. Colorado's Common Interest Ownership Act, CRS Section 38-33.3-217, requires specific recorded consent for a parcel to be annexed into an association's governing declarations. My grandfather never signed anything. My father never signed anything. I certainly never signed anything. The Kincaid Ranch predated Ridgeline Vista Estates by 81 years. As far as Colorado law was concerned, I wasn't a member of that HOA. I never had been. That was my small shield. I knew it wouldn't stop Vanessa Croft. I just wanted it on paper, in the file, before whatever came next. She showed up herself 6 days later, Wednesday, 4:20 p.m. Range Rover crunching up my gravel drive like she owned it, clipboard in hand, blazer this time the color of dried blood. "You didn't respond to the invoice," she said, before I'd even gotten off the porch step. "I responded," I said. "Certified letter. You should have it by now. I got some nonsense about surveys." She flipped a page on the clipboard without looking at it, a gesture I was starting to recognize as pure theatre. "Mr. Kincaid, the board has voted to place a lien on your property for non-payment. You have 30 days to satisfy the assessment, or we proceed with foreclosure under the declaration." "There is no declaration," I said. "Not on my land. Check the recorder's office. Book 412, page 88, 1899. My family's parcel was never annexed." For just a second, less than a second really, a flicker you'd miss if you weren't watching for it, something moved behind her eyes. Not worry, calculation. She was already deciding how to route around the problem, the way you'd steer a car around a pothole without slowing down. "We'll have our attorney review that," she said, and smiled the same smile she'd worn while the chipper ate my grandfather's spruce trees. "In the meantime, the lien stands. I'd hate for this to get ugly." "It already is ugly," I said. "You cut 123 years of trees on a Tuesday afternoon like they were fence posts." She was already walking back to the Range Rover. "It's called progress, Mr. Kincaid. You should try it sometime." I photographed her license plate as she pulled out. Wednesday, 4:26 p.m. Then I went inside, sat down at my grandfather's table, and started doing what I do best. I started digging. It took me 3 weeks, most of it spent at the Piney Fork County Recorder's Office, which still runs on a computer system that looks like it was installed during the Clinton administration. Plus 2 afternoons at the State Secretary of State's Business Filings Database, plus 1 very long, very useful conversation with a woman named Dorothy Hale. Dorothy lived 4 houses down from the New View lots, in a modest single story with an American flag out front that had faded from red to something closer to pink. She was 78, a widow. Her husband Frank had done 2 tours in Korea and spent the last 15 years of his life running the town's little hardware store before a heart attack took him in his sleep. Dorothy herself was on oxygen now, dragging a green tank behind her on a little cart wherever she went. The hiss and click of it a constant soft rhythm under everything she said. I met her at the Piney Fork Library, where she went most mornings to read the newspaper, because she said the print at home made her dizzy. She recognized my name from the certified letter drama. Apparently Vanessa Croft had mentioned me at a board meeting as a difficult holdout, and she waved me over to her table without hesitation. "You're the one who won't pay the tree bill," she said, not unkindly. "There's no tree bill I owe," I said. "I'm not in the HOA." Dorothy laughed, a dry, rattling sound that turned into a small cough. "Lucky you. I've been in it since Frank and I built our place in 1987. Now they're saying I owe $1,100 for the same beautification nonsense, plus interest, plus some facilitation fee I never agreed to. Frank's pension barely covers this tank refill, Mr. Kincaid. I don't have $1,100. Did you get a notice? She pulled a crumpled paper out of her purse. Same letterhead, same pine tree logo, dated the same week as mine. Where mine said 14,000, hers said 1,100, but the wording was identical, right down to the phrase, View Corridor Enhancement. Whatever this was, it wasn't really about trees. It was a formula, a per-household number, scaled to whatever the board thought each homeowner could be squeezed for. She came to my door herself, Dorothy said. Told me if I didn't pay, they'd have to consider my property non-compliant, and it might affect my ability to sell someday. I told her I'm 78 years old. I'm not selling anywhere except 6 feet under next to Frank. She just smiled and left. That night, I sat at my grandfather's table with Dorothy's notice next to mine, and I started running numbers the way I used to run drift calculations for CDOT. 41 households. If even half of them were getting a version of this beautification assessment scaled to what the board guessed they'd tolerate, that was easily $300,000 in immediate cash, not counting the 14 new lots the HOA had approved for sale along the cleared ridgeline. Each one now marketed as Premium Unobstructed Mountain View, each one, according to the county assessor's preliminary filings I found the next morning, listed at just under $200,000. 14 lots, just under $200,000 each. That put the number somewhere north of $2.5 million in gross sales. Against land the HOA had acquired, I found this in the recorder's office, buried in a quitclaim filed 18 months earlier for almost nothing, transferred from the original developer's bankruptcy estate into an LLC called Ridgeline Legacy Partners. Ridgeline Legacy Partners LLC, registered agent Brent Holloway, same last name as Vanessa Croft's maiden name, which I only knew because Dorothy mentioned, almost in passing, that Vanessa used to go by Vanessa Holloway before she married her second husband and took his name. Brent Holloway was Vanessa's cousin. I sat with that for a long minute, the smell of coffee gone cold on the table, the tin roof ticking above me as the afternoon warmed it. This wasn't a woman being petty about tree removal. This was a woman running an LLC through a relative, buying distressed land cheap, clearing it using HOA-mandated beautification funds paid for by squeezed homeowners like Dorothy Hale, and then reselling that same land back to new buyers at massive markup using the HOA's own authority to fund the very improvements that made her private land more valuable. It was elegant in the way theft sometimes is, and it was, by my count, somewhere around $1.3 million in profit she was set to walk away with once those 14 lots closed escrow, on top of whatever she'd already collected in fraudulent special assessments from people who could least afford it. I still didn't know, sitting there that afternoon, about the one detail that would end up mattering more than all the rest of it combined. The detail buried in a private note ledger I hadn't looked at in almost 6 years, sitting in a fireproof box in my closet, related to a small residential loan I'd funded back in 2016 through a private lending arrangement I'd set up after Carol passed, back when I needed something to do with my hands and my head besides grieving. That discovery came later. But now I had Dorothy Hale's crumpled $1,100 notice, my own $14,000 invoice, a county recorder's filing with Brent Holloway's name on it, and a growing certainty that Vanessa Croft had made one very large mistake. She'd assumed nobody below her on that ridge would ever think to look up. The blizzard hit on a Friday, first week of December, the kind of storm the weather service called significant, and everyone in Piney Fork just called the one we knew was coming. I'd watched the pressure drop on my barometer since Wednesday morning, and I'd watched the wind forecast off the ridge shift from 15 miles an hour to a sustained 35 with gusts near 50. 31 years of doing drift calculations for CDOT gives you a feel for weather that never quite leaves you even in retirement. I knew exactly what was going to happen to Ridgeline Vista Estates before it happened. That's the terrible thing about physics. It doesn't care whether you understand it, it just does what it does. Friday night, the wind came down off Sable Ridge with nothing to slow it down. No windbreak, no spruce trees, no 123 years of engineering my grandfather had planted into the ground, one seedling at a time. It picked up every flake of snow crossing that open cleared slope and dumped it exactly where physics said it would. Right at the base of the grade, right where the wind lost momentum, right on Ridgeline Vista Estates Drive. By Saturday morning, the street was gone. Not covered, gone. Drifts 12 feet deep in places, curling over roof lines, burying two cars up to their side mirrors, blocking every driveway on the block. I drove up as far as the county plow had cleared, which was about a quarter mile short of the development entrance, and I stood there in the grey early light with my phone out, photographing what 123 years of windbreak used to prevent. Saturday, 8:14 a.m. I've got the photo still. 41 homes, and every single one of them looked like it had been erased. Dorothy Hale's house was one of the worst hit. Her place sat almost directly downwind of where the windbreak used to stand, which meant she got the heaviest drift on the whole street. Snow packed against her front door up past the doorknob, her propane tank buried, her little oxygen delivery truck unable to get anywhere near her driveway. I found out later, from a neighbour, that Dorothy spent 11 hours that Saturday with her oxygen concentrator running on backup battery, watching the charge indicator drop, calling the HOA emergency line 4 times, and getting a recording that said all board members were currently unavailable due to weather conditions. Vanessa Croft, it turned out, was very available. She just wasn't answering emergency calls from a widow on a green tank. She was on the phone with her insurance broker, trying to figure out how far she could file a claim on the 14 unsold view lots, 3 of which now had partial frame construction sitting under snow that had, according to the builder's report I obtained later through a public records request, structurally compromised 2 roof trusses. That Sunday, with Dorothy's oxygen situation turning genuinely dangerous, I did the only thing that made sense. I called the county sheriff's substation myself, gave them her address and her medical situation, and then I got in my truck with a tow chain and a plow blade I keep for my own driveway, and I went and dug her out myself, working alongside a volunteer EMT crew that arrived about 40 minutes after my call. We got her concentrator hooked to a portable generator I had in my truck bed, and by that afternoon she had heat, power, and a hot meal, courtesy of my neighbour Ruth Aldana, who runs the diner in town and drove up personally with a thermos of soup, despite roads that were still barely passable. I photographed all of it, not for glory, for the file. Sunday, 1:52 p.m. Dorothy Hale's front door, snow packed to the transom, sheriff's deputy standing beside me as a witness. That photograph and the deputy's incident report would matter more than I knew at the time. What Donovan Croft did next is the part that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it. Monday morning, with half the street still buried and county crews stretched thin across 3 separate emergencies, Vanessa showed up at my property line with a small crew and a bolt cutter. I watched it happen from my kitchen window, coffee going cold in my hand, and I grabbed my phone and started filming before I even got my boots on. She cut the padlock on my north gate, the gate that separates my remaining acreage, the land where the windbreak used to stand, from the HOA's cleared lots below. Cut it clean, tossed it in the snow, and directed 2 men with a small bobcat loader through the opening, straight onto my property, without a permit, without a call, without so much as a text message asking permission. "Miss Croft," I said, walking up in my coat with my phone still recording. "That's my gate. That's my land." She didn't even turn around at first. "We need access to clear the drift line before it damages the new construction," she said, like she was explaining something to a child. "This is an emergency situation, Mr. Kincaid. I'm sure you understand." "I understand you're trespassing," I said. "That's Colorado Revised Statute 18-4-504. Second-degree criminal trespass. I've got you on video cutting a lock on private property that a county filing shows was never annexed into your association." That got her to turn around. For the first time since I'd met her, Vanessa Croft looked less like a woman delivering bad news for sport and more like a woman doing arithmetic she didn't like. "You're recording this," she said, not a question. "Since about 40 seconds before you cut the lock," I said. "Timestamps right there in the corner. Want to see it?" She recovered fast, I'll give her that. "This is exactly the kind of obstruction that's put our entire community at risk," she said, loud enough that I suspected it was for the benefit of the two crew members standing behind her, both of whom had gone very still, both of whom, I noted, were also visible in my video. "People's homes are buried, Mr. Kincaid, and you're worried about a padlock." "People's homes are buried," I said, "because you cut down the thing that used to stop that from happening. And now you're trespassing on the only land left that could fix it, instead of calling me and asking." I didn't raise my voice. I've never needed to. 31 years of state hearings teaches you that the person who stays calm is usually the person the tape favors later. She ordered her crew back through the gate. I didn't stop her. I let her retreat with what little dignity she had left, because I already had what I needed. I had video of criminal trespass, a witness statement forming in my head from each of those two crew members, and a timeline that put her actions in direct, provable sequence. Cut the windbreak, caused the drift, then committed a second crime trying to fix a disaster she created herself. That afternoon, I called my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya Deshmukh, who'd handled my water rights filings for going on a decade, and I laid out everything: the trespass video, Dorothy's assessment notice, the Ridgeline Legacy Partners filing, the 14 lots, Brent Holloway's name on the paperwork. Priya went quiet on the phone for a long moment, the kind of quiet that meant she was doing the same arithmetic Vanessa had done in my driveway, except reaching a very different conclusion. "Walter," she said finally, "I want you to do exactly 3 things, in order, and I want you to document every single one of them. First, file a formal criminal trespass report with the county sheriff, attaching my video, requesting it be cross-referenced with any future incident involving Ridgeline Vista Estates HOA. Second, send a notice of intent to seek injunctive relief to the HOA board, care of their registered attorney, establishing on paper that I was reserving all rights regarding unauthorized entry and demanding they cease any further incursion onto my property, a notice that, conveniently, also happened to put my legal position and my property lines on record with a certified mail return receipt, time-stamped and dated, 3 weeks before anything else was going to happen. Third, and this was the one Priya lingered on, apply, quietly, through the county, for a temporary emergency access and drainage permit of my own, on my own land, under Colorado's snow and water management provisions. Specifically, Colorado Revised Statute 37-92-102, related to beneficial water use and control structures. Because here's what most homeowners don't know, and what Vanessa Croft, for all her clipboards and blazers, clearly didn't know either. Whoever controls the land where snowmelt runoff originates controls, in a legal sense, a great deal more than just a view. I didn't tell Priya yet about the fireproof box in my closet. I wasn't ready to pull that thread, not until I understood exactly how deep it went, and not until I had every other piece of the trap built and tested and ready to close. But I filed that permit application on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, sitting at my grandfather's table, snow still piled against my porch rail, and I felt something settle into place that hadn't been there since the day I watched 14 spruce trees disappear into a chipper. I wasn't angry anymore, I was patient. And patient, in my experience, is a great deal more dangerous. The second storm came 9 days later, bigger than the first, and this time the National Weather Service called it what it was, a genuine blizzard warning, sustained winds near 45, 6 to 10 inches an hour at the height of it. I knew, watching the pressure drop on my barometer Thursday afternoon, that Ridgeline Costa Estates was about to get buried again. Worse this time, because the drift line from the first storm hadn't fully melted and the new snow would stack right on top of the old. I also knew Vanessa Croft knew it, because by Thursday evening she was standing in my driveway. She didn't drive the Range Rover this time, she walked, which told me something about how bad things already were down on her street. Probably couldn't get the Rover past her own buried gate. She wore a parka instead of a blazer, and for the first time since I'd met her, she didn't have the clipboard. "Mr. Kincaid," she said, and her voice had lost every ounce of the condescension I'd grown used to. "I need to talk to you about equipment access. I'd been expecting this. Priya and I had, in fact, planned for exactly this. I invited her onto the porch, out of the wind, and I had my phone recording from the moment she stepped up, same as always, timestamp visible. Because by then it was simply how I operated around this woman. There's a county inspector on his way, I told her, and Sheriff Delgado. I called them an hour ago when the forecast updated. I think you should probably wait for them before we talk equipment. Something in her face flickered, that same arithmetic look from the gate incident, except sharper now, more desperate. This is an emergency, she said. I don't have time for. You've had 2 weeks, I said. I filed for an emergency drainage and access permit on my own land 9 days ago. It's approved. I'm building a temporary snow fence along the original Windbreak line, starting tonight, using my own equipment, on my own property, under my own permit. That's going to help your street. But it's happening because I decided to do it, not because you cut a lock again. She actually laughed, short and disbelieving. You're going to fix this out of the goodness of your heart. I'm going to fix it because Dorothy Hale nearly died on her oxygen tank 2 weeks ago while you didn't answer the emergency line, I said. Everything else is between you and the sheriff. That's when the county inspector's truck came up the drive, followed a few minutes later by Sheriff Delgado's cruiser and, this part I hadn't arranged, this part Priya had quietly suggested might happen on its own, a small blue hatchback belonging to a reporter named Alicia Fenn from the Piney Fork Gazette, who'd been following the buried street story since the first storm and had gotten wind, through Dorothy Hale herself, that something was about to come to a head at the Kincaid place. Vanessa's face, watching that little parade arrive, went the colour of the snow around us. The inspector, a tired, thorough man named Gary Ostrowski, who'd clearly seen every kind of HOA nonsense Colorado had to offer, walked the property line with me, confirmed my permit, confirmed the boundary survey, and then, almost as an aside, asked if I had any documentation regarding the earlier trespass incident, since the sheriff's office had flagged it in their system. I handed him the folder. Photos, timestamps, video transcript, certified mail receipts, the whole architecture of 11 weeks of patient documentation laid out in chronological order on my grandfather's porch, under a security light, snow coming down harder by the minute. Sheriff Delgado read through it with his flashlight, slow and careful, and when he got to the trespass video, Vanessa cutting my lock, directing equipment onto my land without authorization, he looked up at her. Ms. Croft, I'm going to need you to come with me to answer some questions about criminal trespass on December 9th, he said. Second degree, under 18-4-504, and given what Mr. Ostrowski just found in the county permit records, I think there's a fraud angle here we're going to want to look at real close too. Fraud? Vanessa's voice cracked on the word. That's when I finally opened the fireproof box. I'd brought it out to the porch earlier, set it under a tarp by the door, not saying anything, waiting for the right moment. Inside it was a private mortgage note dated 2016, funded through a small lending vehicle I'd set up after Carol passed. Money from her life insurance that I hadn't wanted to just leave sitting in a bank account. I'd made 4 private loans over the years to people the regular banks wouldn't touch, secured against real property, recorded properly with the county, interest rates lower than any bank would offer, because I wasn't trying to get rich off grieving people. I was trying to feel useful. One of those 4 loans, made in the spring of 2016, to a recently divorced woman rebuilding her credit, buying a modest house on the east side of Piney Fork before she remarried and moved up the ridge into a bigger place. One of those loans had gone to a woman who signed the note as Vanessa Halloway. She'd never once, in all our interactions, connected my name to the little origination company listed on that 8-year-old note. Why would she? I'd used a business name, Sable Ridge Lending LLC, and the servicing had been handled for years by a small title company that had since closed. But the note was still active, still recorded, still very much enforceable, and it was still, as far as county records showed, secured against a rental property Vanessa Croft owned outright in her maiden name, a property she'd conveniently never disclosed on any HOA financial statement, a property that, I would learn later, she'd been using as informal collateral to secure the very same Ridgeline Legacy Partners development loan with her cousin Brent. I held up the note where the porch light caught it, where Alicia Fenn's phone camera was already recording, where Sheriff Delgado could see it clearly. "Vanessa," I said, using her first name for the first time since I'd met her. "You asked me 2 weeks ago to try Progress sometime. I looked into it. Turns out I've been your lender for 8 years and you never noticed." She stared at the document like it might disappear if she looked at it hard enough. It didn't. That's a different property," she said. But her voice had gone thin, the confidence gone out of it entirely. "Same one you used as collateral for Ridgeline Legacy Partners construction loan," I said. "Which means if this note goes into default, and it will, the moment the fraud charges hit your other accounts, I have the right to call it due in full, immediately, under paragraph 11, which I intend to do first thing Monday morning." Sheriff Delgado, to his credit, didn't rush her. He let the moment sit, let Alicia Fenn get her footage, let Gary Ostrovsky finish cross-referencing the permit fraud he'd already started flagging in the LLC's paperwork, improper use of HOA special assessment funds for private development benefit, a clear violation of Colorado's Common Interest Ownership Act reporting requirements. Then, quietly, without drama, he read Vanessa Croft her rights and walked her to the cruiser in the snow, past the buried street she'd created, past the Windbreak stump still visible under fresh drift, while Alicia Fenn's camera caught every step of it. The case took 4 months to work through the courts. Priya Deshmukh represented me, and eventually a class of 11 other homeowners, including Dorothy Hale, once a district attorney's investigation confirmed what I'd already found. Vanessa Croft had funneled $1.34 million from the 14 new lot sales, plus another $287,000 in fraudulent special assessments collected from homeowners like Dorothy, into accounts controlled jointly by herself and her cousin Brent Holloway, disguised as legitimate development proceeds to Ridgeline Legacy Partners, LLC. Vanessa pled guilty to felony theft over $100,000 under Colorado Revised Statute 18-4-401, and criminal trespass and securities fraud related to the misrepresented HOA financial disclosures she'd filed with the state each year. She was sentenced to 6 years, with restitution ordered at $1,627,000, covering the stolen assessment funds plus the profits from the fraudulent lot sales. Her house, the one secured against my private note, went into foreclosure within weeks once I called the loan due, and the proceeds from that sale were applied directly toward her restitution total, which felt, to me, like a closing of the circle nobody could have scripted better. Brent Holloway, facing his own charges for his role structuring the LLC, cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, 18 months and a permanent ban on serving as a registered agent for any Colorado business entity. 2 of the crew members who'd cut my lock testified against Vanessa in exchange for having their own trespass charges dropped. The new HOA board, elected in an emergency meeting 6 weeks after the arrest, unanimously voted Dorothy Hale in as president. She accepted, with her oxygen tank hissing softly beside her at the podium, and one of her first official acts was voting to waive all outstanding special assessments for every household on the street, funded in part by the settlement money recovered from Vanessa's frozen accounts. I replanted the Windbreak that spring. Not the same trees, you can't replace 123 years, but 340 new blue spruce seedlings, the same number my grandfather planted in 1809, in the same double row, in the same soil that still smelled faintly of sap from the stumps we finally cleared. Dorothy came out to help me plant the first row, moving slow with her tank on its cart, telling me stories about Frank and Korea and the hardware store while we worked the shovel together in the thawing ground. Ruth Aldana brought soup up from the diner that day too, same thermos, and we ate lunch sitting on the tailgate of my truck, looking down at a street that would never again know what it felt like to disappear under a drift. I think about my grandfather sometimes, sitting at that table he built with his own hands, writing, "God willing, they'll hold the snow where it belongs," in a ledger nobody was ever supposed to read but me. He wasn't trying to leave me revenge, he was trying to leave me a lesson about patience, about roots, about how the things you plant quietly and carefully outlast the things people build loud and fast to impress somebody else. Here's what I learned, watching all of it unfold from a porch under a security light in the snow. Paperwork outlasts arrogance every single time. The person who documents wins, eventually, even if it takes months. And sometimes the biggest weapon you own isn't the one anybody, including you, remembers you're carrying until the moment you finally need it. Dorothy still comes by most Sundays now, oxygen tank and all, to sit at my grandfather's table and drink coffee while we watch the new seedlings grow another inch. Last week she mentioned, almost as an aside, that the county assessor's office had sent her a strange notice about a boundary dispute on the east side of her property. Something about an old easement nobody in town seemed able to explain, filed the same year, it turned out, as Ridgeline Legacy Partners itself. I told her not to worry about it. I told her I'd look into it. I had a feeling I already knew exactly where that particular trail was going to lead.